scraper instrument, used most notably in samba, as well as other styles. It's sort of the Brazilian equivalent to the guiro from Cuba, the guirá, the guayo, and the guachara. I think that's how you say it. I'm butchering, my Spanish is not good. Originally, the Reco Reco was predominantly made out of bamboo. However, as you can see, this one is made out of metal with some metal springs. Sometimes they have a bit of like a bell, like a brass instrument at the end to kind of project the sound more. And sometimes they make the bodies out of fiberglass now. Just kind of depends on what you're after sound-wise. In my opinion, the Reco Reco is the most underrated instrument in samba. I even looked down on it before, and in the last year I've sort of slowly fallen in love with this instrument. So I'm going to show you some of the ways I've approached playing this instrument by looking a lot at Reco Reco players. I've never had a formal lesson in this instrument, but I've analysed players a lot and really tried to figure it out. I'm also going to show you two of the basic go-to samba parts that you can alternate between for different sections so you can play along to your favourite sambas. If you're new here, my name is Ferguson. I'm a percussionist based in Edinburgh. I've got lots of other videos about Brazilian percussion, and that's kind of my world. So if you enjoy this video, be sure to check out my other work. And yeah, let's just jump into it. So let's start off by the most important thing. How do you hold this instrument? So as you can see, it's a long body. The bamboo Reco Recos usually have a handle built on. However, the metal ones or the fiberglass ones, you're typically holding it in your open palm of your subdominant hand. Make sure that the hand is kind of traveling along the length of the Reco Reco with your thumb and other three fingers wrapped around the side, index finger going all the way up it, just to give you that strong and stable balance, because you're going to be hitting down the way a lot and adding a lot of pressure that way, so you don't want it to fall out of your hand. The stick can kind of vary. This one just came with this Reco Reco. It kind of looks a little bit like a tent peg. I've seen people hold Reco Reco sticks with the sort of, pointy finger, which is against all drumming sort of technique, but it works really nicely for this instrument. Or you can just hold it in the same sort of fulcrum pinch point you would for a normal drumstick. So as I mentioned, I've not had a formal lesson in this instrument, so I'm purely going off of looking at Reco Reco players, listening to Reco Reco players, and then trying to recreate the sounds. And I've found sort of two different textures that I want to just explain and talk about and show you how I use them. The way I like to consider it is tight or gritty. And yeah, I'm making these up as I go, but bear with me. I use a combination of both these techniques in my playing, but again, they're just different textures. So gritty is a little bit more abrasive. There's a lot more contact on the springs or, the stem of bamboo, if that's what you're using. Whereas tight, it's sort of reducing contact and almost acting a bit like a snare drum or a hi-hat. There are two main sounds on the Reco Reco. There is the ghost notes and the accents. You can also kind of really slowly drag it up to give some kind of almost like a drum roll thing of. Also, you can play with dynamics by, depending on how many springs you have, using more or less of them. So for example, just to kind of demonstrate that. Okay, so 1, pretty quiet, 2, a little bit louder, all 3. In a roda de samba, where this instrument is found most, it's kind of the equivalent of a caixa or a snare drum, right? You don't want it to be too loud and abrasive, so this, although it's pretty loud and abrasive, it's not as crazy as like a snare drum. So let's go over the gritty technique first. So as I mentioned, there are two kind of main sounds, ghost notes and accents. So with your ghost notes, you're just going up and down the whole time. And with this technique, as I mentioned, you're not really leaving the Reco Reco. And you're not moving a huge amount on the springs either. I like to start going down just because that feels right. So if you look closely at my wrist, there's not a whole lot of movement going on. It's pretty minimal. I'm not using the whole length of the spring. It's quite a minimal, only maybe using the middle third of the springs. I'll do that a little bit slower. I've only just noticed this. I wouldn't regularly hold the Reco Reco this high up. I'm just doing it so it's in shot. I would usually hold it a little bit lower rather than up here. But it's okay holding it up here, but just not for too long. The main difference between ghost notes and accents technique-wise, and this applies to the other technique too, is that for the accents, you're whipping it a little bit quicker, so you're moving your stick down the springs quicker, and a little bit more of that movement is coming in from your arm as well. So you're traveling further down the springs or up the springs, and also you're putting some more force and speed behind that. So here's an accent. So an accent on its own doesn't sound too different to a ghost note. But in essence, you want a really quick, punchy sound. Ghost notes, accents. So you should hear the volume difference, because that's the difference between a ghost note and an accent. It's a louder and a quieter note. If that doesn't make sense right now, don't worry. When we apply the technique to the two rhythms I'm going to show you, it'll make a lot more sense. Now, the tight technique. The tighter one, as I said earlier, you're trying to minimize contact with the springs. Almost taking... I actually do let my stick leave the Reco Reco, so the kind of side angle. Still a minimal amount of movement in the wrist. Still not really leaving the middle third of the Reco Reco. And still, this is quite quiet. And then accent again. A little bit more force, letting it travel down the springs a little bit more. Ghost note. Accent. Ghost note. Accent. Ghost note, accent. For me, technique is all well and good. That being said, I think it's really important to learn rhythms as well as techniques so that you can apply the technique. I think just knowing how to do that up, down, quicker or slower doesn't help a lot. So let's go for the two kind of go-to Reco Reco parts you can alternate between in almost any samba. First one is often referred to as samba swing or cajitero on different instruments. We're basically playing a set of 16ths, so there's 4 of these beats per count of the pulse. So if we were to just play straight 16ths with no accents, it'd be like this: 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and so going between the tight and gritty feels there. So that's kind of the idea. And I'm doing this as down, up, down, up, down, up, starting on the downstroke. So to play the samba swing, the cajitero, whatever you want to call it, we're starting off with an accented downbeat or downstroke on the downbeat, on the pulse. All the musical jargon is just getting mixed up in my brain. So accenting on the first downstroke, so the pulse. That's the first bit. The only other thing to add to that is the upstroke before the pulse is also going to be an accent. So super slowly, it sounds like this: 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and So I'm just going between the two techniques, but you don't have to. You can just stick to one, whether you prefer the tight one or the gritty one. So that's the caetero or aheta or samba swing. The other pattern that we can use as a kind of go-to basic is just playing an offbeat accented. So we're still playing the 16th notes all the way through. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and But instead of accenting the 1 and the we're going to be accenting the and. So that'll be our second downstroke in a group of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have something you can take away from this, whether it's just technique or some ideas for playing or actually being able to play along to sambas now. Hopefully see you in the next video. Until then, bye.